The animals in my town keep staring up at the night sky. A r/no sleep story by Richard Saxon. I had just finished an evening shift, and I enjoyed the walk home under a magnificent, almost full moon that dimly illuminated my path ahead. In my hand I held a bottle of Bordeaux, excited for dinner prepared by my wife, Sarah. She'd already left me a text saying she'd almost finished up, and that my dog eagerly awaited my arrival, tapping around the floor in our home, wondering what took me so long. The road home took me past a riding school, with about a dozen horses spending their night in the adjusted fenced-in field. I frequently stopped by to feed them a snack. Carrots or apples mostly. As such, we formed a sort of friendship, but something seemed off that evening. Usually the curious creatures would come trotting over, excited if they noticed me carrying food. But instead of their neighing greetings, they ignored me, their eyes transfixed by the bright moon above. I tried the usual clicking sound to attract their attention, but they did not even take note of my presence. And after a moment of staring up at the sky, and a futile attempts at figuring out what they found so damn interesting, I gave up and continued home. My dog Hugo, a massive Labrador, who still acted as a lapdog, excitedly jumped up to greet me as I walked through the door. He almost knocked me to the ground, barely allowing me to save the bottle of wine I held. Sarah quickly came to my aid, hopelessly trying to pull him off, an almost impossible feat once Hugo had entered his aggressive cuddle mode. But after a few wet licks and some paw marks on my off-white shirt, he calmed down thanks to the temptation of a promised dog snack if he behaved. The horses were acting weird tonight, I said with a mouthful of pork chop. What do you mean? Sarah asked. They completely ignored me, just stared up at the moon. She gave me a concerned look before glancing over at Hugo. That's odd. The same thing happened as I took the dog out for some fresh air, just before he got home. He wouldn't stop staring up at the sky. I had to drag him back with me. Well, that's different. Hugo is clearly an idiot, I said as I gestured to our dog lying with his snout half submerged in his water bowl, producing bubbles with each breath. Sarah giggled and we went about our dinner, doing our best to just enjoy our weekly date night with wine, dinner, and a boring movie. The next evening following work, I once again passed by the riding school, this time making sure I carried with me a bag of irresistible goods for the magnificent horses. I figured they've been sulking last night, since I passed without a worthy offer. Yet, they still stared up at the moon. I stood by their fence for a few minutes, clicking at them, holding out tasty carrots, even throwing some at their feet. They just kept staring, their attention locked at the shiny celestial body above us. Eventually, it started to get cold, and I headed back home. As I arrived, I found Hugo standing in our garden, his eyes fixed at the sky, with Sarah desperately trying to drag him inside, all the while shouting profanities at our massive idiot, but he refused to budge. Sarah, what's going on? This dumbass won't come back inside, she panted as she pulled at his leash with all her force. I bent down to pet Hugo, hoping some love would convince him to move his chubby behind. He growled at me as I reached out my hand. Shocked at the sudden change in attitude, I bent down to try again, but instead of his cuddly self, he bit me. Hugo bit me. Though it wasn't a particularly hard bite, one that didn't even break the skin, it was still the first time he had any sort of aggressive behavior towards us, or anyone for the matter. He's always been a peaceful, if not bit docile creature. In anger, I grabbed his collar and started dragging him back inside the house. All the while, he barked and growled in defiance. We put him in his travel cage for the night and locked the door so he could lay there and think about what he'd done. We went to bed angry, discussing what to do about Hugo's sudden outburst. Call a veterinarian? Enroll him in classes? Or just take it as a one-time event? He's always been the most loving being, so something was most definitely off. Then, as he awoke in the morning, ready to give our dumb dog another chance, we found him still lying in his cage. He's always, without fail, jumped up once he heard our footsteps approaching him in the morning. But on that particular day, he just lay there. "Hey boy, wake up," I said as I opened the door, but he still wouldn't move. It didn't take long for the rationalization to hit me. Hugo was dead. He passed at some point during the night. Only 7 years of age. We cried as we embraced his limp body in our arms. He's been a large dog, but he never felt that heavy. Refounded to a furry bag of meat with no personality inside. I called in sick to work, but my wife didn't get the chance as they were unsatisfied after she unwillingly left. I took the time to bury Hugo in the garden, telling him I forgave him for biting me, that he was the best dog anyone could ever have, that I loved him. Following the burial at 10 in the morning, I cracked open a beer and decided to watch some television. Any distraction was a welcome gift. I flipped through the channels, filled with daytime crap, until I stumbled upon a local news segment reading the writing school. The very same one I passed every day to and from work. During the night, all of their 16 horses have fallen over dead, and just like with Hugo, there was no absent cause. It was just like they stopped living out of sheer willpower. I knew it had to be related, and fearing the horses might have died from some sort of infection, maybe one that I've carried home with me and transferred to Hugo. Feeling more than a bit guilty, with the limited medical knowledge, I called a veterinarian, half sobbing as I asked if I've somehow killed my own dog. The woman on the end of the line sounded tired, exhausted from an overnight shift, and explained that no disease would carry over from creatures with a healthy human as a carrier. She continued to say that it was the citywide situation, with pets and local wildlife falling over dead, and no one could fathom why. Due to this, the city was about to order all pets be kept inside while they could assess the situation, but for us, it was all too late. Sarah came home in the evening from an overnight shift. Apparently, quite a few of her coworkers haven't turned up for work, even without calling in sick, and she had to stay behind to pick up the slack. She brought flowers for Hugo's grave, and while she took a few minutes to say goodbye, I cooked up dinner, hoping to brighten the mood ever so slightly. As the pasta reached the perfect capacity and sauce simmered in the pan, I realized that Sarah still hasn't come back inside. I walked out into the garden to find Sarah at Hugo's grave, but she wasn't there to say farewell. She simply stared up at the moon, unmoving, no care as to what was happening to around her. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I asked, concerned. She didn't respond. "Sarah, come on," I said, my voice getting louder as I walked over to her. Still no response. I grabbed her shoulder, which caused her to violently flinch in shock, as if I snuck up behind her to scare her. She seemed frizzled, but at least it got her attention. "Oh, shit, sorry, I kind of spaced out there for a second. Is dinner ready?" "Yeah. What were you looking at, Sarah?" "What do you mean?" "You were staring up at the sky, just like Hugo," I said calmly, as I realized how stressed out she seemed. No, I just zoned out. She trailed off. "It's alright, Sarah. Let's just eat." We finished dinner in silence, and we went to bed without discussing Hugo, nor what happened to my wife. Something about her felt different, broken, but I couldn't decide whether she'd seen something in the sky, or if she was just distraught from the loss of her dog. I tossed and turned in bed that night, unable to rest, drifting in and out of consciousness. A dreamless sleep filled with nothing but worry. At the same point, I reached out my arm and realized Sarah's part of the bed was vacant. A realization quickly jolted me awake. After running through the house, calling out her name, I caught a glance of someone standing in our garden staring up at the sky. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled as I ran over to her, ready to drag her back inside. But before I could reach her, she collapsed to the ground. "Sarah!" I ran over to check on her, and though she was still alive, I couldn't get her to regain consciousness. Without further hesitation, with my hands trembling, I called 911, immediately awaiting response. It rung for a few minutes, and there were no one to answer my call. 2 minutes, then 3, and then at 4th minute, waiting without an answer, I hung up, deciding I would drive her to the hospital on my own. I sped through our little town, noticing a few passed out people lying on the side of the street, all in various states of undress. Nightgowns, naked, fully clothed. Whether the situation, something was terribly wrong. As we arrived to the hospital and pulled into the drop-off, meant for the ambulance, I was shook by the obedient silent atmosphere surrounding the area. Only a single doctor came out to address the situation. "Where the fuck is everyone?" I asked as I carried my unconscious wife out of the car. The doctor looked stressed, but not surprised, clearly overwhelmed by whatever had been happening during the night. He quickly looked over at my wife, checking for any signs of consciousness. "Come on," he finally said. "Let's get her inside." The hospital seemed void of any staff, only operating by a minute skeleton crew. But despite the scarce help, the lobby itself had been filled to the brim with hospital beds, stretchers, and wheelchairs, all occupied by other unconscious people. "What's happening here?" I asked as we struggled to find a free bed. We don't know. Half of the staff simply didn't show up for work, and the rest are acting strangely, refusing to stop staring at the moon. It doesn't make sense." He pointed to a few nurses and doctors running from patient to patient, desperately trying to figure out what happened to them. "This is all we have left," he said. "My wife, will she be alright?" I asked. The doctor didn't answer. It was beyond what any of them had ever dealt with, and it clearly showed our town had been rampaged by an impossible, senseless disease with an unknown cause. I sat with my wife for a few hours, and by some stroke of luck we managed to find her a room occupied by only 5 other patients. We apparently suffered the same condition, non-awakening from their forced slumber. After a while, I decided to get some fresh air. I needed to think, to come up with a solution, and at almost 3 in the morning, I veered outside for a cigarette, out of habit. I've quit a few years earlier, but desperate times call for desperate measures. On my way, one of the doctors stopped me. "Where are you going?" "Out for a smoke." "Why?" He shook his head in frustration, as tired and burned out as the others. "Just don't look at the sky, alright?" I nodded and walked outside, staring at my feet for each step. As I inhaled the toxic smoke, I felt less horrified, and after 3 cigarettes, I forgot why I ever quit. I firmly kept my eyes at the ground, the ambulance, the building, anything but the sky. Alas, in the window at the entrance, I saw the reflection of the bright lunar body, and that was all it took. I looked up at the moon. It had been one that transfixed the animals, my wife, and probably all the other people suffering. During the past few days, I spent a lot of time looking up at it, wondering what kind of mysteries have driven people to their health, sanity, and then, for the first time, I noticed something different. They haven't been staring at the moon at all, but something beside it. Something new. Next to the moon, hung by mistake. Black square, only visible due to the illumination. Outline created as the moonlight reflected off it. I could only barely see it, but nevertheless, there it was, glowing ever so slightly with each passing minute. I should have been horrified. I should have ran back to the hospital, but I couldn't. It was too beautiful, perfectly symmetrical, with shades of black surrounding its ever-growing aura. It was hypnotic. I couldn't stop looking at it. Hours passed, and the moon disappeared below the horizon, replaced by the glowing orb of sunshine, taking the magnificent shape with it. I've only then realized that I've been standing there, unblinking and unmoving at the object in the sky for the entire night, and it made me feel happy. I spent the night unwillingly staring at the moon. My wife is still unconscious, but it no longer worries me. My only priority is the incredible shape, whatever it is. Something awakened within me. I first laid my eyes upon it, and I know in my heart when nightfall comes, I won't be strong enough to resist looking up at the night sky to look for the black spear. That's why I'm writing this now, while I'm still myself. Whatever you do, when night creeps over your home like a blanket of darkness, stay inside. Don't look up at the sky.